The University of Minnesota Board of Regents meeting on Friday, March 9th, 2012 will please come to order. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of our Chief Information Officer, Scott Studham. President Kaler, please go to the podium and introduce our new officer.
Madam Chair and Regents, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our new Vice President and Chief Information Officer, Scott Studham, who, on his personal website, declares that he likes technology, barbecue, humor, and wit. So, Scott, please join me at the podium. But he dislikes lazy people, bureaucracy, and obstructionists. You can see why I hired him. And so we gladly welcome Vice President Studham, whose first day on the job was last month and who has been extremely busy ever since. It was a particular pleasure to be able to bring Scott here from the University of Tennessee. Before he was at UT, he was the CIO at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. As our Chief Information Officer, Scott will be responsible for ensuring this, that's really Freudian, enduring and ensuring the strategic and operational excellence of both academic and administrative information technology for the entire University of Minnesota system. I do believe he's a visionary leader and will be a tremendous addition in our efforts towards operational excellence. Scott, welcome, and please say a few words.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join. Regents, it's a pleasure to join the university. Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Colleagues, it's been great to get to know many of you. I look forward to working with all of you as we look forward to how technology can help our educational experience, and really look forward to working on improving our efficiencies and making sure the faculty and students are helping drive the future of our academic experience. So thank you very much.
And Vice President Studham, please come around and greet the Regents and allow them to greet you and welcome you.
Thanks for joining us. Look forward to working with you. That's his last assignment.
The next item on the agenda is recognizing the new 2012-2014 McKnight Land Grant professors. And Vice President Mulcahy, please join us at the podium to recognize our new professors.
Chair Cohen, members of the board, President Kaler, honored guests. It's my privilege and honor to be here this morning to recognize the McKnight Land Grant professors for 2012. And I can tell you this is the kind of a day the Vice President for Research lives for. It's a great honor to recognize the accomplishments of our colleagues. The goal of this extraordinary program is to advance the careers of our most promising junior faculty at a critical period in their professional lives. They were each chosen through a very competitive peer review process for their potential for important contributions to their field, the degree to which their past achievements and current ideas demonstrate originality, imagination, and innovation, the significance of their research, and the potential for attracting outstanding students. The recipients are honored with the McKnight Land Grant Professor, a special award that they will hold for 2 years. The award also consists of a research grant in each of the 2 years, summer support, and a research leave in the second year. Each will receive today a certificate recognizing this honor, and it reads, McKnight Land Grant Professor, the Regents of the University of Minnesota, on the advice of the faculty and the Vice President for Research, hereby appoint the honoree as a McKnight Land Grant Professor in recognition of significant potential for academic distinction, with all the rights, privileges, responsibilities attached thereto. Signed by Brian Steeves, Executive Director of the Board of Regents, Eric Kaler, President, and Linda Cohen, Chair of the Board of Regents. And at this point, it's my honor to introduce our land grant professors. I would point out to all of you that a short summary of their accomplishments and their areas of expertise are listed in this booklet. And if you really want to be impressed, be sure to take one and read of the accomplishments of these great faculty. So as I call your name, please join me at the podium, and we'll do this one at a time. We will get pictures of each, and we would ask you, after you've had your individual picture, if you just stand off to the right, we'll get a group picture as soon as we're done. First, we'd like to honor Professor Yingling Fan from Public Affairs. Professor Joshua Feinberg. I should have pointed out that Professor Field's department is Earth Sciences, and I failed to do that. I apologize. Professor Melissa Gardner from Genetics, Cell Biology, and Development. Did we get it? Professor Jason Hill from Bioproducts and Biosystems Engineering. It did flash. Yeah, he got us good. Okay. Next is Professor Daniel Keefe from Computer Science and Engineering. We were just commenting on Professor Keefe's other accomplishments in the front row over here on the left. And finally, this morning, Professor Dominique Toubel from the Department of Surgery. It's great to have friends. So before we take this last photo, would you all please join me in congratulating our 2012 McKnight Land Grant professors.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
David's pitching. What's that? David's pitching the geologist for the INA.
I'd like to call for a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting.
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The next report is from our president. President Kaler will be interested to hear what you have to report to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It has been a very busy and eventful 4 weeks since we last gathered. I was pleased that many of you were able to attend my first State of the University speech last week, and you might be pleased to know that also about 700 people joined us online. In the speech, I outlined initiatives for our three-part mission of teaching and learning, research, and outreach and engagement. Allow me to give you a brief synopsis. My theme for the speech was balances, and not only the balances on the books or in our labs, but also about the balances we strike for this university as we move forward in a challenging time. Perhaps most importantly, it is that critical balance of risk and reward as we seek operational excellence, as we drive change and move from being very good to truly great. As you recall, last summer, following the government shutdown and the special session, the university received an additional $25 million, and I had to decide, with your approval, how to allocate it. We acted responsibly. Most notably, we allocated $4.1 million to reduce tuition for in-state undergraduate students this semester, and we reduced their planned tuition increase for fall 2012 from 5% to 3.5%. That increase is the lowest this century. Since 2000, annual tuition increases here have ranged from 5.8 to 14.7%. Tuition and student debt are the topics of national and local higher education conversation. And as painful as a 3.5% increase is for many of our students, it's been reported that the average increase in public higher education tuition in the past year was 8.3%. New York State University system, where I once worked, saw a 14% increase, Arizona 17%, Washington State 16%. Students in California's public universities and colleges are facing an average increase of 21%, the highest in the nation. Of course, our increase is still an increase, and I am acutely aware that many families and students are concerned. But we are in a better place than many institutions across the nation, and I hope we can remain so. In my State of the U speech, I also previewed the budget I will recommend to this board in May. First, except for raises and financial aid, the cost pool increase is 0%. Zero. I pledge to hold the line on administrative costs, and this budget does that. We will eventually be able to reduce our administrative costs, as I have also promised. Second, we have budgeted a 2.5% compensation increase for all employees. This follows 3 years of salary freezes or modest increases in a furlough and increased health care cost burden to our employees. This rewards our terrific employees who have carried us through some very difficult budgets, and I'm grateful to them. Third, I will include a pool of about $21 million for academic investments to be awarded competitively, and this is extremely important to me to solidify and build upon our excellent faculty. I spoke, too, of our work on operational excellence, including risk recalibration efforts you heard about at last month's board meeting from Vice President Mulcahy. I've charged each senior leader to implement a risk recalibration initiative in their respective areas, aimed squarely at addressing the university's risk-averse culture by eliminating unnecessary or redundant policies and procedures. I was surprised to find, and you may be surprised, that we have 265 academic centers and institutes, and they have budgets totaling more than $200 million annually. I have asked all of our deans to look at and examine the mission, centrality, value, and scope of each of these centers and institutes. Administrative centers will also be examined. We may find that some, and maybe even most, remain valuable and relevant, but I'm willing to bet others are not. Let me turn to the university's legislative agenda. We are working every day to tell our story, and I've testified 7 times at the Capitol in the past month. I think I will soon be eligible for frequent testifier points. I have met face-to-face with nearly 100 of our 201 state legislatures, and the governor joined me at our Gopher hockey game last weekend, and we will also watch our women Gophers tomorrow in the NCAA quarterfinals. Meanwhile, we are activating our 21,000-person-strong grassroots network. I've testified in support of our capital request, about my vision for this university, and just Tuesday about the issues of separation and transition packages for former administrators. Here's what I told members of that committee. I regret that those past decisions on compensation packages may hurt the public trust in our stewardship of this great university. While these agreements were set before my arrival, I am the president of the University of Minnesota, and I take responsibility for where we are now. President Brunix did act within our policy, which gives the president discretion, but I also told the committee that I viewed these packages as very generous. My approach will be different. I'm committed to transparency, accountability, and the public trust will guide every action that I take. I explained that our compensation policies reflect the market and practice in higher education across the country. Our policy allows administrators returning to the faculty to take a transitional leave at their faculty pay level, which is generally lower than their administrative salary. That policy is clear that if someone does not return to the university after their sabbatical, the transitional salary must be repaid. I intend to stick to this policy guideline. However, anyone who has managed people knows that personnel matters can be complex, and managers often need some discretion. Nonetheless, I will ensure that substantial deviations from our policy are reviewed with the leadership of this Board of Regents. I am going to work with our senior leadership team and the Regents to review all of our compensation policies and practices and make any changes we all deem necessary and appropriate. And I made this personal pledge. My contract does provide a year transitional leave at the presidential salary before returning to the faculty. That is my intent, but if for some reason I don't return to the university after that leave, I will pay the university back. Amid all of this, I have continued to make visits to departments on our Twin Cities campus. I've had regular lunches with faculty, been fully engaged with the Itasca Project's higher education initiative, traveled to Florida to meet our alumni and donor groups, and next week we'll visit the Moorhead area to speak to the Rotary Club, local media, alumni, and of course, spend time with Regent Allen. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the special fun that Karen and I had Monday night when we attended our first Mason's Table Lodge dinner here on campus. If you've never been to one, well, let me just say it's quite an experience. Or as a true Minnesotan might say, it's different. I'm very grateful for all that organization has done for our medical foundation and this university. It is a remarkable group of Minnesotans working for the betterment of us all. And I also take a little bit of time to enjoy the good news that's occurring every day on all of our campuses. Of course, yesterday we announced that Dr. Shri Zahir will be presented to you as the Dean of our Carlson School of Management, a very exciting appointment that solidifies Carlson as one of the nation's great global business schools. Earlier this week, it was announced that we have received a gift of $6.65 million from the Benson Foundation for a high-tech teaching laboratory in the School of Nursing and to further strengthen the existing Benson Scholarship Program. This gift is a continuation of the philanthropic relationship between the university and the Benson family, which began in the 1970s. The Benson Foundation's latest gift is the largest in the history of the School of Nursing. Larry and Nancy Benson were U graduates and believed their success in life was firmly rooted in the education that they received here. Their legacy is profound, and we are deeply grateful to the Benson family. And just last night, I attended here at McNamara with Chair Cohen and other regents a truly remarkable event. 134 of our faculty and researchers who produced 65 patents and 74 licenses in the past year were honored. The event not only celebrated the knowledge we create and the innovations we produce at the U, but it celebrated our rich interdisciplinary diversity and the power of our vast interdisciplinary culture. I really wonder how many other institutions can claim patents and licenses coming from 13 separate colleges and units, including our medical school, CFAN, CEHD, CLA, and our Natural Resources Research Institute at UMD. Such achievements show how much we matter to this state and to its economy, and they confirm the sort of impact we have on the lives of Minnesotans. It is that exact theme that we are promoting in a series of radio ads and print ads around the state. When you honored me by making me this university's 16th president, one of my charges was to tell our story better around the state, and it was more to fully detail our value to the state, and I've been working hard on that. Earlier this week, I sent commentaries to 10 news outlets around the state focusing on the value of the university statewide and in each of their communities. In our local and print ads, in our radio and local print ads, in a concise and personal way, community leaders and alumni each tell their story and declare where we are today is thanks to the University of Minnesota. And I think we can cue up a 30-second radio spot that's running in the Crookston area.
Growing up with 15 brothers and sisters wasn't easy, but growing at the University of Minnesota Crookston was. I got everything I needed to nurture my interest, and now I work with others to do the same. As mayor of Crookston, I'm helping to grow the community. This city is my family, and I'm used to big families. My name is David Jenricks, and where I am today is thanks to the University of Minnesota Crookston, where I was driven to discover how dreams can grow. Tell us your story at supporttheu.umn.edu.
Madam Chair and Regents, those of us who graduated from and love this university all have great stories to tell. We also face real challenges, but I know all of us around this table face them with great energy, much passion, and a deep belief that this university changes lives, drives discovery, and every day makes Minnesota a great place to live, learn, and work. In closing, I would like us to take a moment to remember a wonderful university community member and longtime public servant, Gary DeCramer. As state senator from 1983 to 1992, Gary led our Humphrey School's Masters of Public Affairs program. He died suddenly on Wednesday. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family. With that, Madam Chair, I conclude my remarks.
Thank you very much, President Kaler. You certainly are telling our story and telling our story better and working harder and with so much energy. I'm almost tired just listening to everything you're doing, and we appreciate your energy and your wisdom.
Thank you very much.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Regent Johnson.
May I make a brief comment about the President's comments?
Certainly.
2 points. First, President referenced Senator Gary DeCramer, who I had the privilege of serving with, but we also lost another great supporter of the University of Minnesota, and Senator Gary Kubley, whose memorial service we attended on Wednesday. And I thought back about those two gentlemen and their service to our state, but they too were in their way advocates for this university, and we've had many discussions about the university and all of its programs and alumni. So we, as a board, as you did, want to recognize them and thank their families, and I have spoken with Senator Kubley's wife, and I will continue to do that. Second comment, Madam Chair and board members, and please bear with me, I think it's important that we as a board recognize the President's comments in regard to compensation. And the reason I say that is, and the President has been very kind and generous with his time as I have made phone calls to him and some of you, it's an issue that the public has paid attention to. And what brought it to my attention was I encountered parents out in west central Minnesota who have a student here, and the dad said to me, Dean, my wife works full-time, I work full-time, we're looking at another part-time job so we can financially support our student at the university. And then I began to look at what was not under your watch but compensation, And you have promised this board and this university to do a better job, and I compliment you. I compliment you in that regard to begin to restore a more prudent, better use of tuition dollars, taxpayers' dollars as we move forward. And I want to, publicly acknowledge that you recognize that, and this board recognizes it, to get us a little more restorative confidence in the way we do the finances of this university. And I think the board feels strongly about that, as the university community. And I know our citizens are watching that, and I have assured them that our new president has a careful, watchful, prudent eye. And we stand ready to work with you on these matters for the future. So I thank you for that, and we look forward to working with you in future days on budgetary matters. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Regent Johnson, for your comments on an important issue. The next item is the report of the chair. Several regents attended a legislative reception at East Cliff on February 13th, and the board hosted legislators for a dinner at East Cliff on February 21st. Congratulations to President Kaler on your first State of the University address, and on balance, and I think I've heard very many positive comments about that address. And I also want to congratulate you on your appointment to the United States Department of Homeland Security Academic Advisory Council. Yesterday, the Regents had a really important day in many ways. At lunch, we ate lunch with students. So the reason we are all here is the education and research that goes on in this university, and it was wonderful to be able to have lunch with the students in a dormitory, Sanford Hall, and to hear their perspective. That evening, yesterday evening, we had dinner with many Regents professors, and again, the mission of this university was emphasized. I do want to add one other item that happened yesterday. Following the passage of a resolution adopted by the board yesterday, I have spoken with Regent Steve Swigum, who is no longer a regent with us, and accepted his resignation from the Board of Regents. The seat on the board from the 2nd Congressional District is now officially vacant. I want to thank the board enormously for following a process that was judicious and fair. And I want to thank Steve Swigum for his record of public service over a period of 30 years. The next meeting of the regular Board of Regents will be held on May 10th and 11th, 2012 on the Twin Cities campus. I would now like to receive and file reports. The next item is the consent report. Is there a motion to approve the consent report?
So moved. Second.
And second. It's been moved and seconded. I would like to add, although we normally don't invite presenters on the consent report, I would like to ask Provost Hanson if she would like to come to the podium and to make some remarks about the new Carlson School Dean appointment. Provost Hanson.
Thank you very much, Chair Cohen and members of the Board of Regents. It's my pleasure to recommend your approval of the appointment of Professor Srilata Zahir to the position of Dean of the Carlson School of Management. Professor Zahir currently holds the Elmer L. Anderson Chair in Global Corporate Responsibility, and she served as interim dean since last June. She has been a longtime member of the faculty of the Carlson School, and for the last 4 years, prior to her being interim dean, she was the Associate Dean for Faculty and Research. She earned a PhD in International Management from the Sloan School of Management at MIT and a Master's in Business from the Indian Institute of Management. Her research is centered around the risks faced by multinational corporations and on the impact of technology in international location and organization. And her research has won a variety of international awards, including the Heldridge Haynes Award for the best interdisciplinary work in international management. She was named in 2007 a Fellow of the Academy of International Business, the highest honor in the field. She was a consulting editor for the Journal of International Business Studies, and she's a founding member of the International Academic Council of the Indian School of Business, which was set up by McKinsey, Kellogg, and Wharton. She is also co-director of the Center for Integrative Leadership at the University of Minnesota. She is a longtime member of this intellectual community, and she has enormous enthusiasm and passion for the Carlson School of Management. So I recommend her as the dean.
Thank you very much, and we're really very excited, which we will vote on shortly, to have a new dean of the Carlson School. Regents, I just want to note that there are some items from committee consent agendas, and because committees did not meet this month, those are on the full board consent agenda. So it's been moved and seconded that we accept the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion about it? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion carries. The next item is the annual review of the Board of Regents calendar, and the calendar comes to the board annually as required by board policy. It has been updated to reflect changes the board has adopted over the past year. And if the Regents have any questions about this, you may follow up with board staff following the meeting. The 2012 six-year capital plan is the next item on our agenda. So President Kaler, please introduce the item, and Vice President Jones, Senior Vice President Jones, Vice President O'Brien, and Vice President Fitzenreiter, please join us. President Kaler.
Chair Cohen and Regents, I'm excited to introduce for action the 2012 six-year capital plan. This is, of course, the first plan developed in my presidency and reflects my long-term vision for this great university system-wide. When it comes to bricks and mortar, the plan is all about facilities, usable spaces, and sustainability. But it is driven by the key tent poles of our fundamental academic mission: student success, scholarly faculty impacts, maintaining a statewide footprint for outreach and engagement, and serving as excellent stewards of our hundreds of buildings. We must do all of this while responsibly managing our finances. So please, if you will, direct your attention to the podium where the plan will be presented.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, and Regents, we're pleased to be here before you this morning for your consideration and action on the 2012 six-year plan that covers the fiscal years 13 to 18. The board will remember that at our February meeting, the Facilities Committee, the Finance Committee, and the full board had a robust and thorough discussion of the six-year plan. What is the six-year plan? Board of Regents policy directs the administration to develop a capital budget with a six-year time horizon that's updated annually. The university has done this since the late 1980s. The President's recommended 2012 six-year plan includes the current state capital requests for 2013 that will be acted on by the legislature during the current session, future state capital requests for 2013 through 18, and proposed projects to be financed with university resources during the same period. The six-year plan is a tool to support Board of Regents as they ensure that the capital investments of the institution advance the academic priorities. This document provides a foundation for President Kaler's administration. After its passage, we'll proceed into academic programming and then a pre-design. When we return next spring with them to the board for updating the six-year plan, It will be with more definition to this strategic direction and the items that are included in the plan. What defines the 6-year plan? Well, the priority planning process begins in each academic unit at the compact level, and the compact process is revisited every year. As the highest priorities surface for campuses and colleges, they advance as part of compact submission, consideration, and approval. Then the priorities across colleges and departments are considered for their strategic significance by chancellors, deans, and ultimately the academic vice presidents and president. The 6-year plan before you today varies somewhat from past 6-year plans because the process has resulted in identifying investments in a strategic direction and programs rather than a list of specific projects. Factors such as project sequencing and location have influenced the timing and selection of these investments. Ultimately, the 6-year plan that is before you, after rigorous analysis and discussion and decision-making, is recommended by the President. The 6-year capital plan information starts on page 61 in your docket materials today. With that, I'll turn it to my colleague, Senior Vice President Jones.
Chair Cohen, members of the board, President Kaler, I think we all would agree that the successful achievement of the university mission is dependent upon having the right facilities and infrastructure. This 6-year plan was a guide by the capital planning principles that you see before you, all of which are included on page 65 and 66 of today's docket. These capital planning principles are described in detail as specific objectives, but also in regards to the measures that are used to analyze consistency and fit. I'd like to highlight just a few of them for you to highlight the importance in how we adhere to the 6-year planning principles. We adhere to the principle of ensuring student success by creating facilities that improve teaching and learning outcomes, and also that by creating facilities that are uniquely designed to enhance the student experience. We go about measuring the impact of our adherence to these principles by looking at and analyzing the student retention rates, graduation rates, and our measure of student learning outcomes. We also have the principle of fulfilling our statewide mission, which is involved and related to creating specific facilities needed to achieve unique mission elements of each of our campuses, our research and outreach centers, and field stations and other resources scattered across the state of Minnesota. We also would like to remind you that we review facilities only as one tool in the delivering of the academic programs that cuts across the University of Minnesota system. Measures of these principles includes facilities utilization, efficiency measures, and the facilities conditions needs assessment. There were a number of key findings that evolved during our meetings with deans and other academic leaders regarding the 6-year plans. And there were a number of common themes that cut across that process. One of the key findings was that there was a need to upgrade laboratory space, and this was defined across many disciplines and in many different formats. It ran the gamut from everything from wet laboratories to technology-enhanced computational labs, performance laboratories, and this was across a wide range of colleges and academic disciplines. Another key finding was the need to create more interactive classroom space, which was founded on the concept of flexible use in space, space that is more heavily reliable or rely on technology to support shared learning and a different learning style. There also was a key finding, a common thread regarding increased collaboration among units that have found ways to match resources and to share facilities was an important thread that cut across these discussions. This involves such innovative ideas as hiring comprehensive faculty teams to strengthen interdisciplinary research and teaching, as was brought forth by the College of Biological Sciences, the consolidation and redistribution of space, particularly among those colleges that have what we call split geographies, where colleges have their location split between the Minneapolis and/or the St. Paul campus. There was also a key finding and a desire to share a laboratory and other kinds of learning space, for example. Another common thread was the desire to control cost through a more efficient use of space, and this is something that we think has an opportunity to gain considerable momentum as we support the reconfiguration of existing office space. The full list of projects through the 3 bienniums is included in today's docket on page 70 through 73. The 6-year plans fall logically into these areas of focus that you see before you, consistent with the 6-year planning principles that I mentioned earlier. Actually, most of the projects in the 6-year plan fulfill more than one of the capital planning principles. So let me just touch upon a few examples. The Tate Laboratory project clearly is a cornerstone of the Northrop Mall with approximately 200,000 square feet of older space. The renovation will occur after the physics and nanotechnology building that is currently under construction is occupied. The renovated Tate will create a new home for the School of Earth Sciences and update science classrooms and the non-laboratory portions of the School of Physics and Astronomy. The St. Paul Campus Research Lab investments will create a new microbiology labs and office for the combined use of 3 St. Paul colleges, namely the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, the College of Biological Sciences, and the College of Veterinary Medicine. This will allow then for the decommissioning of obsolete space such as Hodson Hall and for the reconstruction of existing space in biosystems and agricultural engineering and the fisheries lab and Crawford Laboratory. On the Morris campus, the 6-year plan identifies the need to convert Briggs Library to a digital information center and learnings common. Whereas on the Crookston campus has advanced the need for additional wellness space to support their student success, while at Duluth, the plan is clearly a need for additional classroom space to support the significant increase in their enrollment. There are also, as you well know, a need for HEPA investments, which will have a multiplier effect on the condition of campus facilities and remain a cornerstone of the university's facilities renewal program. It's also important to note that we also remain committed to our strategy that we've talked to you about in the past of decommissioning buildings, which is an important step in a comprehensive strategy. And in some cases, demolition follows decommissioning, but not in every case.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, and Regents, usually my colleague, Vice President Fitzenreiter, would take up the comments on this slide, but he is currently still with a group of legislators looking at a few of our capital bonding requests. So I'll fill in for him here and say that this was studied thoroughly in the Finance Committee and at our last meeting. You'll see the recommended request has a total of $1,321,000,000 plus dollars. I would note that in the 75% of this plan that is envisioned as state funding, $495 million of that would be a request of HEPA funds. So more than half of that $987 million is actually a HEPA request. I also would comment that the theoretical impact on the University of Minnesota's debt is predicted based on the anticipating that all the projects are funded and that all projects are debt financed. And of course, in our experience, we found that somewhere between 50 and 100% of our request has been funded. And we've been fortunate to get grant dollars or contributions to cover some of these expenses in a 6-year plan as such that's before you today. And Madam Chair, we're ready to take any questions or comments the board might have.
All right, Regents, I'm sure some of you might have some questions or comments. Regent Frobenius.
A few comments I'd like to make. First, to indicate the Finance Committee did review this during our previous meeting and looked at the impact of this on our debt capacity. We still continue to maintain a fairly good cushion to, within our debt capacity to accomplish these projects and still maintain our current rating with the rating agencies. So we're comfortable with the scope of the projects. I want to comment about 2 projects that are in this because of what I think are their particular importance and that didn't happen to get mentioned in Vice President Jones' comments today. One is the AHC release space repurposing in 2016. And
Excuse me, but we're going to discuss this item. Do you mind if I recuse, please, Madam Chair?
That's just
I
fine,
need to
thank
bring
you.
it up to ask you to leave.
He'll find any excuse to get me to leave.
Right,
She wanted a break, so she asked me
to bring that up, right.
No, that as well as the item in 2018, which is the Health Sciences Interprofessional Education Facility. I don't know exactly what's in each of those 2 at this point, and part of this process of approval gets it into the really more intense planning queue that gets us to define this. I just think that between these 2, we've got $65 million in one and $85 million in another, approximately. 2 major commitments to our basic health education and allied healthcare area commitment, which, quite frankly, I think we've kind of lagged in the last few years. There's some enormous needs within our state, in our region, in this area, and I'm just pleased to see the work process start on these elements, and that it's just considered critical, and look forward to this board having a chance to follow these as they gain some more detail as going through the planning process.
Okay, Vice President O'Brien.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, Regent Frobenius, I really appreciate you bringing up the Academic Health Center repurposing as well as the Education Center, and it really also responds to the question that Regent McMillan asked yesterday, and that is when PWB has no longer clinics in it, what's going to happen? And I want to point out that this is in the 6-year plan to address the issue, and also that many of our units that are currently in lease space will be returning to the campus, and really the repurposing of our academic health center buildings will save us money in terms of those leases, but also potentially the decommissioning of other space on campus.
Thank you. Regent Beeson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This goes to the last question, Regent McMillan's, and go a little further to suggest that between the construction of the ACC and the opening of the cardio and cancer buildings, it almost gives rise to a relook at our land use plan, our campus plan around the AHC. So rather than, and I know we're not automatically going to go in and begin renovating our, those existing properties, but there'll be claims on those. But before we do that, it seems to me that it's an opportunity to look at that part of our campus and see whether we want to change the space of the use of the space and just a broader conversation about the campus plan.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, Regents, Regent Beeson, absolutely, and that work is well underway.
Okay, thank you. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, I'm looking on page 78 items, and it's somewhat in the distance, items 123 to 127. Madam Chair, I discussed this with you earlier, and that is our athletic facilities use of space. And I think we're at a very good time with the searching of a new athletic director. And that new athletic director, as we look at utilization of our athletic space here at the university. And I would just ask the administration that perhaps inventory of space availability and, you know, it's high profile, I understand that. We read in the newspaper, there's wants for new basketball facilities, there's this and that, and I understand that, but it has to fit into the total mission of the university. And so I think that it's a good time that we would do inventory on space usage, availability, costs, and good planning.
President Kaler.
Madam Chair, Regent Johnson, thank you for that question. One of the important elements as we transition in the AD position is to develop, well, we have a capital plan for athletics that needs to be refreshed and reprioritized. That will be teed up so that the new athletic director can have input to that. These facilities also offer a significant opportunity for private fundraising, and sometimes in that arena, you build things perhaps in the order you can raise money for them, which might not be exactly the order you would do in an ideal world. But at the end of the day, we will have a strategic plan for these facilities, and we'll move them forward appropriately.
Great, thank you.
Regent Larson.
One of my significant concerns, and I think a number of other regents and members of the administration join me in that, is HEPR. It seems to me that in the past, we've gotten whacked on that by the legislature. And according to what I saw about Governor Dayton's suggestion, the same thing could happen again. And my conclusion has been that it's penny wise, pound foolish. That if we do not take care of our facilities in the long run to maintain them or to maintain them in use, it ends up costing us significantly more than if we had spent the money at the right time to keep them up to speed, if you will. What is our strategy to address that, and how are we telling the story so that people realize if what I just said you believe is true, so that people, our representatives in the legislature, as well as the governor and anybody else who has significant influence over that, realizes the short-sightedness of that.
President Kaler.
Regent Cohen, Regent Larson, thank you. Our ability to tell the story of HEPR, if you will, is critical to our success going forward. It is one of the key elements I stress in all of my communications with our elected leaders, the governor and legislators. And we will continue to emphasize the importance of that. And I think having Regents' voices also amplify that message is important. And we're moving forward. There are 4 senators today touring campus, looking at our facilities, and we began in mechanical engineering, which is our one of our critically important HEPR requests. So it's a matter of telling our story and keeping the pressure up. And I'd encourage all voices in that conversation.
President, am I overstating the concern or not?
Chair Cohen, Regent Larson, you are, if anything, understating the concern. It's a critical need for the campus statewide.
So I encourage all regents to step up on that issue. It's not that complicated. It's kind of like if you don't change the oil in your car on a regular basis, chances are you're going to have a big problem.
Madam Chair.
Vice President O'Brien, you have something to add.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, Regents, and Regent Larson, first of all, it's good to see you here. Secondly, absolutely, as President Kaler said, we are experiencing, of course, the historic lack of funding to renew our facilities. The one thing I would share with Regents is that because we have increased the amount of our ask and because we have been persistent in telling the story and consistent, the amount of dollars have been inching up. So if we look at our trend, we're going the right direction, and we just really have to keep the foot on the pedal here in terms of the story. Pedal on the metal, right. Thank you.
Right, as long as the car's working and we've changed the oil.
That's right.
Okay, Regent Broad.
Madam Chair and Vice President O'Brien, I'm interested in your comment about historic lack of funding on buildings, because I thought the bonding numbers have been pretty well consistently going up. But one thing that I think was interesting to point out, and that I learned from you at the last Facilities Committee meeting, is that anytime we actually spend less on a project, that money then goes into HEAPR opportunities for us. So when Vice President O'Brien manages the projects well, it helps us get to those projects that you're talking about. And I just thought that was such an interesting fact that that was news to me, and I appreciated learning that. You know, one of the things I was looking at in this is one of the comments that I had made last time was related to a philosophy and a principle of engaging in or seeking out public-private partnerships and alternative financing opportunities for the U as a principle within the plan. And I'm not seeing it there, and I'm wondering if it's there and I'm just not seeing it, because if it's not there, I really am frustrated that it's not there, because I do think that that is a principle that we should be engaging in as a university, as part of our core philosophy for these capital projects that we do. And it's not to say that the public-private partnerships are be-all, end-all, but they certainly should be a principle for evaluation and the metrics that we're using. And I was looking at page 65, 66, and 67.
Madam Chair, Mr. President, Regents, Regent Broad, we absolutely heard you last month. As Vice President Fitzenreiter said at the time, he is chairing a committee and working on a report for the President on how to refresh the university's approach to public-private partnerships. So while we did not amend the plan that is before you from last month, it certainly is our intention when we are back before you that you will see more attention to that.
Are there any other questions or comments from Regents before we vote? President Kaler, do you have anything more to add?
No, Chair Cohen, I do not.
Okay. So we have a motion before us to accept the resolution on this six-year plan. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much, Vice President O'Brien and Senior Vice President Jones, for a very interesting, important presentation. The next item had been the resolution related to the ambulatory care center. And this item is pulled from today's agenda, and we will consider it at a future meeting. This will align the timing of this board's action more closely with action by the Fairview Board, which is one of our partners in the ambulatory care center. So Senior Vice President Jones, you shouldn't have gone too far because the next item again is one of yours, and Provost Hanson. So it's a very important subject, the university's land grant mission, and we look forward to hearing about that. And I was just going to ask President Kaler if he had any introductory remarks, but he can do those. Okay, just fine. And so Provost Hanson and Senior Vice President Jones, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. And thank you to the board for allowing us to present to you today. What we're going to do in today's presentation is provide a bit of historical context to the university's land grant mission, a bit of an overview of how it was established, and then provide a perspective on how we execute the land grant mission today. And we've divided this up so that I'll present a bit of the historical context, and Vice President Jones will be providing an account of some of the ways in which we execute the land grant mission today. And together, I think those two parts of the presentation will provide a context for the challenges we face in pursuing the land grant mission and advancing a 21st century vision. We've built in time for questions and discussion at the end. This will be about a 20-minute presentation. So let's see, is this where we advance it? That's the medallion showing the sesquicentennial of the original Land Grant Act, the Morrill Act of 1862. The land grant mission is integral to the University of Minnesota, part of the establishment of it, so it's crucial to its identity, and it's best understood in terms both of the original act of 1862 and of the subsequent acts which helped fund and actually provide the underlying values for the land grant mission. It opened up, the Morrill Act opened up higher education to the broad population and laid the groundwork for the public research university. It advanced learning, discovery, engagement with the population of the area, and had a particular vision of the common good. In 1862, the focus was really on agriculture and serving the needs of a rural state and a developing industrial society. If we think about what the historical context was in 1862, the U.S. is in the middle of the Civil War, we're in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, we're in the middle of important population changes, and in the middle of the industrialization of some of these things like agriculture. So the purpose, this one? This is from the language of the Morrill Act, and we'll be alluding to this a number of times, so we just wanted to make sure that slide was up there, that the purpose of the land-grant colleges, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and that's a reference to the kind of way in which education proceeded at that time. There were classical studies, people read Latin and Greek, studied philosophy. But again, if you think of the time, The Origin of Species was just published 3 years before. The sciences were not developed in the way they are today. And higher education had a particular form, mostly for the wealthy, before the Morrill Act. So the Morrill Act established land-grant colleges by providing federal grants for land that could be either sold or used to develop these colleges. And it brought broad education, the kind of education that was available only to a few then. But it also emphasized some particularly important things for the Republic, which was, of course, imperiled at that time. Including military tactic to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts, in such manner as the legislatures of the states may respectively prescribe, in order to promote the liberal and practical education of the industrial classes in the several pursuits and professions in life. So, these are the pieces of legislation which in a variety of ways furthered the land-grant mission and helped shape it. They contribute to what we today think of as the land-grant mission. First, the Morrill Act, which again provided the first financial basis, and importantly emphasized both liberal and pragmatic aspects of education. The Hatch Act of 1887 might be seen as a very explicit emphasis on research, because what it did was establish the agricultural experiment stations. The second Morrill Act of 1890 is, as you know, post-Civil War, and what it did was emphasize in a new way access for other groups of people besides rural people in the states that didn't secede from the Union in the early 1860s. It created historically black land-grant colleges and universities. And one of the things that you can notice about that is that this connects with this idea of increasing access to higher education, which is the other cross-cutting theme about the importance of the land-grant mission. The Smith-Lever Act of 1914 authorized extension services to reach across the university, extend the outreach of the university to the entire state, and that connects with what we today think of as our public engagement mission. And of course, we still maintain extension services. The last part that we mention as the enabling legislation, the 1994 Elementary and Secondary Education Reauthorization Act, re-emphasized access, this time extending land-grant status to tribal colleges. The land-grant mission, thus, has evolved over time in concert with changes in the external environment and people's sense of what the community needs to remain a strong community. But the spirit of the land-grant mission has in many ways remained the same. It's involved an idea of bringing people together to be better educated for a better society, for each individual to lead a better life, and for the society as a whole to be founded on democratic ideals. The distinctive strengths of a land-grant university are many, and they are raised to a kind of exponential level here at the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota has a number of features that are common to other land grants, but it also has a number of very distinctive features that make it a leader. It's a comprehensive university with a reach throughout the state, 67,000 students on 5 campuses, 370 degree programs, 11 research and outreach centers statewide. It has a huge impact on the state. It's one of the few institutions in the country with an agricultural focus, an engineering focus, an academic health center, all the professional schools, law school, business schools, statewide extension. It's something that I think demonstrates the value in all of the ways that the Morrill Act originally intended and the ways in which the subsequent legislation extended access. It is, of course, the state's research university and its land-grant university, and that's a distinction that is something that puts it into a small class of peers. The university has a global reach now, and that is partly because the mission of the land-grant university makes that appropriate. We are now engaged as a community with the whole world. Part of what made a difference in 1862 was the extension of communication devices. Think how communication devices have changed to this point. We are globally engaged, and it's important that we prepare our students for living in a flatter world. The university is the economic engine of the state. It is a patent powerhouse compared, again, to peers. It's ranked 4th among U.S. universities for patent creation and innovation, and its graduates have founded over 2,600 companies, generating $46 billion in revenue. Its urban location makes an important difference to the inflection of its mission today, and it's one of the things that we'll talk about in a minute. It's a new issue of access that arises for us in the 21st century. And again, it's an institution which has a demonstrated history and a steadfast commitment to excellence. 20 Nobel laureates in our history, 86 Guggenheim Fellows, and right now, among the many geniuses on campus, 2 MacArthur geniuses. The University of Minnesota is 8th among all public research universities in external funding from the NIH, the NSF, and so on, though the state itself is 21st in terms of population, so we are doing very well on those measures as well. Now, as I say, there are some diffuse aims of creating a more perfect union for the U.S. that are underlying the Morrill Act and the subsequent legislation. There are also these unique land-grant features connected with agriculture and the mechanical arts, and we want to focus a little bit on those today. Some of the things that the University of Minnesota has that are uniquely land-grant: the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, the College of Veterinary Medicine, the agricultural experiment stations, the extension services, and again, this multi-campus system that extends the reach of the university throughout the state. The University of Minnesota is one of 73 land-grant universities in the country, but there are also, after that 1994 act, the 30 tribal land-grant institutions, 17 historically black land-grant colleges. They are enormously important to the whole structure of higher education and research in this country. It is really, this legislation really developed what became the envy of the world in terms of the construction of a research and higher education infrastructure. The Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, APLU, show that public land-grant universities grant 85% of research university bachelor degrees. They educate the population of the United States. They serve as the primary route for U.S. minority students earning bachelor degrees, about 800,000 per year. They enroll over 70% of the research university graduate students and award 58% of U.S. doctorates. They account for 62% of NSF science and engineering research expenditures. Again, they are the higher education and research infrastructure of this country. Now, part of what I've been trying to suggest is a kind of arc of history here about the way in which the mission, the values that underlie the land-grant institutions have remained the same. But the external environment and the needs of the community have changed over time. And so we wanted to give you a brief slide there which captures the difference between the 1860s and the present. The aim of access is still crucial to us. At the time of the Morrill Act, very few people would have the capacity to get a higher education because it was really, in fact, limited to the wealthy. But our aim today is to increase access for talented, prepared, eager students from all backgrounds. The context is very different. There was the development of the United States territories at the time of the passage of the Morrill Act. But now our emphasis for our local and regional good must be global. As the population changes in the United States, the demography to which we must be responsive changes, and we have thus an important emphasis on diversity. As we have changed from the point of the Industrial Revolution and new forms of agriculture in the mid-19th century, we have a much more complex and difficult economic environment today to which we must be responsive. The fields of study which we're engaged in have thus changed. They are not as simple as they used to be, and as our populations have increasingly become centered in urban environments, our mission remains the same, but our particular responses must change. We have, again though, these two aims which are so crucial to our identity: liberal education and practical education. And we are interested in workforce development, but also citizenship development to form, again, a more perfect union of people prepared to live in a 21st century world. That is why the University of Minnesota offers liberal education as a foundation for all its students, professional degrees. It offers degrees in healthcare. We prepare people for today's working environment and also prepare them to lead in the future. To talk a little bit more about the details of how we do that in the particular area of agriculture and natural resources, I will turn to Vice President Jones.
Chair Cohen, members of the board, I'd like to focus the rest of the time that we have for this presentation on providing a perspective on how we execute the land-grant mission today, and to give you a context for some of the significant challenges that we face in this current environment of limited resources and growing domestic and global challenges, how we continue to grapple with and advance the mission of the land-grant university. And then near the end, I'll provide a bit of context of how we must continue to rethink and reinvigorate the land-grant mission so that it will remain as relevant today and as has been for the last 150 years and what we must do to make sure it remains relevant for the next 150. And as was clearly demonstrated in Provost Hanson's presentation, a land-grant mission cuts across this entire university multi-campus system and all of its academic disciplines. But to give us an opportunity to have a peek at some of the challenges we're faced, I will focus my remarks primarily on what I consider to be two of the anchor institutions or anchor components of our land-grant mission, and that is our agricultural, natural resource-based academic work through the work of the Agricultural Experiment Station, and then talk a bit about the challenges that we face through that outreach and engagement arm of our land-grant mission, which is our University Extension Service. And so I think you all would agree that the agriculture and the experiment station and extension are foundational models of the university land-grant mission, and they remain as relevant today as they were in 1862. We know that agriculture and the innovations that have come out of our colleges of agriculture, including our own university, have had significant impact on our economic vitality. Much of the $8+ billion impact that this university has across the state of Minnesota comes from the work that goes on in serving the public good through our agricultural research. Studies find that as much as 20 to 80% rate of return on every dollar that is invested in agriculture and agricultural research. A recent study by Alton et al. Says that the last dollar spent on agricultural research returns $32 to society. So I think it's very, very clear that, that as a critical component of our land-grant mission, the work that we do through our colleges of ag and natural resource sciences and our experiment station function basically has generated a significant return on the investment. In fact, throughout the literature, without question, the literature shows that land-grant universities have generated much of the scientific management advances that contributes to the productivity of U.S. agriculture. Agricultural outputs have increased 150% from 1948 to 1991. This activity or this increase has occurred through innovations and advances of technology and animal and plant genetics that has led to new hybrids, seeds, and new hybrid plants and animals, and new financial management systems, and a significant growth in human capital. However, the definition of agriculture is changing significantly. Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota, and I think in around the world. And as you know, the Minnesota Agricultural Experiment Station, as Provost Hanson stated earlier, was created by a piece of legislation that's very much tied to the land-grant mission. But the definition of agriculture is changing dramatically. For example, our agricultural experiment station no longer just focuses on agriculture. It involves not only the College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, but College of Biological Sciences, College of Education and Human Development, the School of Veterinary Medicine, and the School of Design. So the notion of an agricultural experiment station has morphed considerably since the legislation that created it went into effect. The experiment station work that goes on as a part of our land-grant mission is no longer just rural focus. It involves tremendous focus on urban communities, health and nutrition, and natural resources and environmental issues as well. So we face a problem here with preparing students for careers in agriculture, while the definition of agriculture has changed dramatically. And I think we're about one slide ahead of me there. So changes in the agriculture legacy is also being impacted by the issue of student access and the fact that our rural base has changed dramatically. The long-standing legacy of students coming into a College of Ag, primarily from rural and farm backgrounds, has changed dramatically because of the changing demographics. More often than not, students are coming from more urban surroundings without the same deep knowledge and engagement with agriculture. And so this has provided some challenges and also some opportunities. So there's been a shift in demographics, but there's also been a shift in student interest. over time in colleges of agriculture and natural resource sciences. Some of the core or foundational disciplines like agronomy and plant genetics and soil science, which is the part of the agricultural structure academic framework that I evolved from, are less common majors than they were even 20 years ago, not only to talk about what happened back in the 1800s. Now agriculture majors are more apt, students in agriculture are more apt to be interested in disciplines such as environment, natural resources, and in nutritional sciences. This poses some significant challenges, I think, for College of Agriculture as we go forward, because the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities released a report that predicts that if this trend continues, there will be significant shortages of individuals in the agricultural sciences, and this will pose not only a serious threat for agriculture and our ability to generate the kind of return on investment that I talked about earlier domestically, but it also will impact our ability to address some of the global challenges that I'll be speaking about in a moment. Next, to highlight some of the challenges that we face in terms of what I call another part of our anchor, a part of the land-grant mission, is the University of Minnesota Extension. I think you all know very well the story of University of Minnesota Extension and how we had to fundamentally transform that model from the old traditional model that is still in place in most land-grant universities across this country, where there is an extension office in every county. And certainly up until about 15 years ago, we had that model, but that was an extension office in all 87 counties. But because of economic trends and economic pressures, we had to transform that model to a model now where there are 15 regional offices that has found new and exciting ways to reach a growing number of citizens of the state of Minnesota by leveraging technology, because most of our people that the Extension serve are all connected to technology, and so Extension has had to reinvent itself away from the model of having a single agent standing out in the field of every grower and every county across the state of Minnesota to a extension agent serving a broader number of people by leveraging technology. And I think that has improved the effectiveness and efficiency of our extension model. In addition, just to show you the impact, I think we are clearly reaching more people. Last year alone, Extension reached out to over 710 Minnesotans that took part in extension programming, and over 43,000 Minnesotans volunteered at that time to participate in master gardening programs, master naturalist programs, and 4-H programs. One of the biggest challenges facing Extension in the future is the issue that essentially brought about the transformation that we currently are experiencing, is the decline not only in state support, but decline in federal support, as you can see in this slide. Since about 1991, not only has there been a decline in the hatch funds that support the experiment station function of our land-grant mission, but also the Smith-Lever funds, which is the primary source of federal dollars to support our extension work. And this has led to a situation where Extension has fundamentally had to create a new business model for itself. No longer can it depend on county, federal, and state support. It has had to generate more of its support from a business model that increased a fee for service, grant writing to generate additional resources, and development activities. In fact, about 27% of the extension budget these days comes from these other revenue sources, not from federal or state government. So in order for our extension entity as a part of our land-grant mission in the future to remain relevant, it has to continue to create new ways of reaching more citizens of the state and serving those folks more effectively with declining resources and also with a smaller number of personnel. What I'd like to do next is just talk a little bit about what I consider to be one of the fundamental additions to the land-grant mission, which is not necessarily, shouldn't be thought of as a fourth leg in what we call the three-legged stool of teaching, research, and outreach. And that's the issue of engagement. Public engagement is something that the university values greatly, is one of the components that was recently added to the university's land-grant mission. In fact, we were involved with the Carnegie Foundation in creating the structure and the criteria for classifications of universities as being an engaged university. We helped develop that criteria and are one of the universities that's classified as an engaged university. What engagement simply means is that the university's researchers are partnering in different ways with communities to embrace and leverage our academic knowledge to solve a number of complex problems. Engagement cuts across our teaching, our research, and our outreach mission in fundamental ways, and we've been working very closely with the academic side of the house, with the provost's office, to structure engagement as a fundamental part of what we value as we evaluate our faculty work at this institution. So it's what we value, and also is becoming more and increasingly more what we reward as a part of the scholarly work. The other side of engagement focuses on student activities, and it's about how do you help students round out their education by participating in community-based work. And currently about 1 out of 5 students have had experiences that were connected to their academic courses, but it was work that was done in communities. And 86% of our students agree that opportunities to connect academically to work with community-based work is very, very important to their educational experiences. So engagement cuts across all parts of the University of Minnesota and is an important part of how we go about doing our work. And just to remind you, several years ago, you approved the university's grand idea of having more of a place-based strategy in the community to carry out this kind of publicly engaged work to serve the public good, and that's the university's Research, Outreach, and Engagement Center as a new model of a place-based strategy so that the university can work more effectively in carrying out its engagement work. So what are the challenges for the 21st century? This is a list that basically gives you some idea of the world in which we live and the world that is before us. There are a number of challenges that we face as a land-grant university that runs the gamut from dealing with the fact that we are an urban university and we clearly are living in an urban age, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. The changing demographics that not only exist in our state and our region, but across the world, the burgeoning world population, the environmental challenges that we face with climate change. And one of the biggest issues is the issue of food security and food safety that I think clearly the land-grant mission must step up to the plate in order to resolve each and every one of these complex issues in a world of declining resources. The land-grant mission going forward, if you've heard President Kaler say several times since he arrived here, is that the land-grant mission going forward is going to be, as we continue to focus on our work in urban and rural communities, it's going to have to be more urban-focused and also more globally focused. And that's because we clearly live in the urban age. Indeed, the majority of the world's population lives in cities. There's a number of equal to the entire world population in 1960. And so 85% of all jobs now, or pretty soon, will be located in U.S. urban regions. So because of our presence in this big urban community, we have to think more strategically and intentionally about our role as an urban university. And we need to do that as a core part of the work that we do, not work that is done on the margins. And so these complex urban challenges are something that we fundamentally believe that the University of Minnesota has a responsibility to step up to the plate and leverage its resources to solve some of these complex challenges. A good example of some of these contemporary urban challenges is something that you've heard the President talk about again several times, and that's the issue of the achievement gap. I can't think of anything that's more complex and perhaps more daunting and challenging than the achievement gap, which basically is the lack of educational attainment and the very low level of education attainment among a number of underrepresented groups, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. is so bad in the state of Minnesota and this region that we believe that there needs to be a state of emergency declared around this issue. Minnesota has one of the largest gaps in the nation. Progress in terms of closing that gap over the last couple of decades has been slow. We are program rich, but systems poor. We have our recent analysis that we've done on the number of programs that are designed to close the achievement gap would suggest that there are more than 500 programs that are operating within the 7-county metro designed to close the achievement gap. We certainly know that not all of those programs are effective or efficient. So we're program rich, but we fundamentally believe we're systems poor. There's no overarching system, no data-driven accountability system to allow all of the great work, all of the best practices to be replicated across regions and across boundaries so that in the end we can close the achievement gap in the aggregate. So the fundamental question as we think about the context of the land-grant mission and the celebration of this sesquicentennial is what is the role of a land-grant university in solving a complex problem like closing the achievement gap. As President Kaler stated in the State of the University address, we think the university has a very important role to play, and we are in the process of leveraging our academic expertise and our ability to convene people around important issue, and we look forward to President Kaler's leadership in helping us pull together and create that common table so that we will be able to close this important and distressing issue. The last thing I'd like to just comment on briefly here is that as we go forward with the land-grant institution of the future, we clearly have to continue to think about our role and the land-grant mission in solving complex problems. As you can see, particularly at the global level, as you can see in this particular slide, by 2050, the world population is projected to increase significantly. And I believe that the land-grant universities, and particularly those universities that land-grant mission and they have expertise in solving food and fiber and biofuels related issues, are going to have to step up to the plate in order to address this burgeoning growth in the population, which is projected to increase by more than 50% over the next 30 years or so. And most of this growth will occur in Africa. So the great global challenge, I think, for the land-grant university of the future is addressing the issue of food issues, and this will require new methodologies. And there is a recent effort called Feed the Future that maybe some of you have heard about that provides an opportunity for land-grant universities and other institutions to think systematically about how it must increase its research and its research capacity to resolve food-related issues in response to the growing and increasing global population. Recent data that came out of this framework for Feed the Future initiatives was suggest that globally, farmers will have to grow more wheat and maize in the next 40 years than was produced in the previous 500 years to meet that growth in population. So this is a daunting task. It's a task that only a land-grant university system, but not only, but primarily we have to step up and be leaders in putting together the multidisciplinary disciplinary teams and complex university partnerships in order to effectively address this growing issue, because we fundamentally know that issues of conflict around the world increasingly will be built around the issue of eradicating hunger and poverty around the world. Just want to leave you with the example of how our land-grant mission is already starting to operate in a very broad and very highly impactful global context, and that's the whole global health initiative, that work that is going on. It's a major grant that we received a couple of years ago, which involves a partnership not only between the University of Minnesota and Tufts University as leads from the U.S. Side of the partnership, but it involves about 11 Eastern African countries and also Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. This is work that is designed to create the capacity to address the complex issues and to be able to manage and provide the training and infrastructure necessary to respond to emerging zoonotic diseases. These zoonotic diseases can be potentially very devastating, and the idea here is how do you leverage the resources of these U.S. universities to build capacity in these countries to be able to diagnose and be able to control and manage the outbreak of these diseases to prevent them from reaching stages and spreading to other parts of the world. And this is a project that clearly, because of our land grant roots and our land grant capability, that we're able to take a significant leadership role in. So from my perspective, the land grant mission remains strong. It remains vital. It's becoming increasingly complex. It has been broadened in its context in terms of what is encompassed in the land grant mission. But from my perspective, the land grant mission remains alive, it remains viable, and it remains as important today as it was in 1862 and will be even more important in the future. How do we revitalize our land grant mission? I think it just goes back to the basic mission statement that we have to continue to extend knowledge and exchange ideas between university and society and apply that scholarly expertise to community problems by helping organizations and individuals to respond to their changing environment by making the knowledge and the resources created and preserved at the university being accessible to citizens of the state, to the nation, and the world. So our land grant mission, I think, going forward is critically important. It will remain important. And there are a number of activities I'd just like to highlight in closing. With this being the sesquicentennial of the signing of the Land Grant Act, there are a number of activities that are being sponsored. We decided not to have just a one-day celebration. There will be an ongoing series of celebration that will be going on throughout the academic year. Among them will be a forum that will be hosted by President Kaler exploring the 21st century land grant vision, which will be in the Great Conversations format. He has invited Nancy Cantor, the president of Syracuse University, who you know is one of the leaders in terms of looking at how university needs to be more engaged with the surrounding community. And so on May 2nd, they will be engaged in a great conversation about the role of land grant universities in dealing with contemporary urban issues. There are a number of other activities that are being planned across our campus and across our system that also will be providing an opportunity for all of our academic departments, all of our campuses, to provide forums and gatherings and an opportunity to celebrate our land grant mission. So in closing, I would just like to say that I think our land grant mission is well suited to address some of these contemporary issues that we face today and the global challenges that we face in the future. But to do so, we must continue to create new models, we must continue to innovate, we must continue to communicate more effectively across global boundaries, and also collaborate more effectively around the world. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present a perspective on the Land Grant University for the 21st century.
Thank you very much, Provost Hanson and Senior Vice President Jones, for really reminding us of our land grant roots and how that's changed through the 150 years. I also want to urge you to let us know the dates of the various land grant celebrations, because I think various regions like to attend various activities, and so we'll look forward to doing that. And now I'm sure there are many questions and comments about the program. So, Regent Simmons.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I am deeply grateful you brought this presentation and therefore conversation to the Board of Regents. I think this is fundamental to how we execute our mission. And I have some questions and then look forward to, again, more engagement, including engagement of this board. I think it's profoundly important. My first, and these are all related, question is, to what extent does federal law define the land grant mission? Second, is there the likelihood of any revision in that in federal law? Third, what roles do states play in defining the land grant mission? And finally, not to be answered today, but to me a real question is, what's the target of the mission? Is it Minnesota? Is it the United States? Is it the world? not that they're mutually exclusive, but how we allocate resources and where we put our priorities would certainly have an impact from that answer.
Provost Hanson?
Chair Cohen and Regent Simmons, thank you very much for a very deep set of questions. I suppose I'm not the best person to answer the details of the way in which the law constrains it, but I think as you look at the variety of land-grant institutions across this country, there are many inflections that have been developed locally. So there's clearly flexibility in some way in what empowered the creation of the land-grant institutions. In some ways, they provided, the federal law provided something like the fiscal basis for the land-grant mission and a set of guiding ideals. Those have taken various forms depending upon the local setting and the social circumstances of the time. And really, I guess you see that in the series of laws that we think of as defining the mission, which clearly provides a kind of arc of increasing access. There are changes that could be made if there were other kinds of enabling legislation, and there, as we noted, the most recent one granting land grant status to the tribal colleges is really quite recent, 1994. And Congress has from time to time worked off of what is a particularly compelling vision to create other forms of federally sanctioned research and education and outreach institutions, the sea grants, the space grants. And so it's really, I think, the underlying ideals which could be enabled with different kinds of legislation at both the federal and the state level. I think in our circumstances, we see the university having grown up in part because of the federal legislation, but in part also because of the embrace of that by the state and by the local community. I think that the way in which that remains important to us, that we are situated in a particular place in a particular set of circumstances, that is crucial to what is, I think, again, an underlying feature of the wisdom of the series of bills that created the land grant mission. But it does mean, I think, that we are engaged more than locally. I mean, as the features that provoked the first Morrill Act, the development of Morse code, for example, if we think of what the communication devices were during the Industrial Revolution that's sort of covering that initial period, our ways of communicating with and being engaged in the whole world are so different now. And it's not as if we could possibly ignore those. So we have to be engaged both locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally. If we think of the issue about preventing certain kinds of diseases spreading, the vectors for their spread are so much different today with airplane travel and global migrations than they were in the mid-19th century. Our business, in some sense, is guided by the same set of interests in creating a better educated, more prosperous, more engaged community, but the sense of what that requires has to be globally understood.
Okay, a follow-up, Regent Simmons, and then we'll move.
Yes, please. Just so you know, I found that a highly satisfactory, satisfying answer. I'd love to probe it more, and we can't entirely today, but when we think of, I mean, the Morrill Act, I don't know of anything that transformed the United States and this state more. I really don't. And when we look to the future and recognize we really have some horrible challenges in higher education, just doing what we're doing, but yet stepping up to greater challenges, critically important for this state and this nation. And I just welcome more conversation on this.
Thank you. Regent McMillan, and I have Regent Larson, Frobenius, Beeson, and Broad so far.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, and I also want to compliment you on looking back as we look ahead and look into the historical underpinnings of the land grant mission as you try to translate that into a relevant mission 150 years later. My concern is that while we're highly focused on agriculture, which we need to be in all the elements of agriculture, as I think back to the underpinnings of the Morrill Act, I think we got something like 27,000 acres of land from the federal government, and what underlies that land, at least in northern Minnesota, is a lot of minerals. So here's my concern. We've been enriched incredibly by mineral resources at this university, and I think it's important as we look at this mission to raise up the role of mining and mining resources and what it's meant to the university over time and what it can mean going forward, whether it's in a huge number of endowed faculty positions at the university here, of taconite scholarships here in Duluth, funding for NRRI. There's a lot of things we should be thankful for, but beyond that, and I want to be really, really clear here, it's not just me as a northern Minnesota person. I think, you know, I grew up down here in the Twin Cities, and it wasn't until a 6th grade trip to the Iron Range that I even knew we mined anything in the state. So it's important, I think, that the university add to its remissioning here some recognition and a substantial, you know, debt of gratitude to what mining has meant and what it can mean. And then there's a more practical side to it. There's a huge financial opportunities just with ferrous mining without even touching non-ferrous. There's university ore underlying 2 of the 3 most active operations up there that are being talked about for expansion. So just a little more, I think, raising up of that of mining would be really important. And if you've been watching the hockey tournament, there's a little ad going on that if it wasn't growing, it was probably mined. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but again, that underlies the spirit of my comments, so I don't know if there's a question built into that or not, but I just don't see quite as much mining emphasis here as I'd like to in mineral resources. Thank you.
Senior Vice President Jones.
Yes. Chair Cohen, Regent McMillan, I think you're absolutely right, because if we reflect back on what the land part of that land grant mission actually means, it was the way that the federal government, rather than giving cash to these universities to carry out their academic mission, they granted land. And it's my understanding that occasionally, that land wasn't necessarily in the state where the educational institution was located. Apparently, Cornell University has several thousand acres of land in Wisconsin because there wasn't resources in the state of New York to provide them the resources to finance their mission. And so a lot of the land resources that the university owns on the range or is very much congruent with that land grant mission. But for us, it's the gift that keeps on giving. You know, a lot of these institutions were given land and they sold it in order to generate the revenue to get the universities up and running. And clearly, being able to leverage that resource and the other resources that the university has is very much congruent with the original intent of the land grant mission in providing resources to help carry out the teaching, research, and engagement mission. And those resources have been very fundamental to our teaching and our research and engagement activities.
Regent Larson.
Thank you both for a wonderful report. What are described by most people as 2 of the most significant problems facing not only the state, the country, but the world you addressed. One is the achievement gap, and the other is the growth in the population, but even more importantly, the growth in the consumption of food. Whereas the population is expected to increase around 50%, the demand for food is expected to double. Yes. Both of these are important issues, but I would like to think of them as huge opportunities as compared to problems. It's a huge opportunity for the state of Minnesota to help, and the university to help to fix this achievement gap. If we don't, we are not going to be nearly as competitive as we are today. As our population becomes increasingly more diverse, and many of our minorities are underachieving significantly relative to the Caucasian population, we must fix that, and I think that most of the people in the business community are, if they don't already realize it, are beginning to realize it. So we need to figure out ways to form collaborations where we can be a model and get this achievement gap fixed, because it's one of the few areas that this state is way behind in relative to the rest, most of the rest of the country. And it could become a serious liability. On the other hand, if we can figure out collaborative and creative ways to get it fixed, it could become a huge advantage. That's number one. The second issue of critical concern is the demand for food in the world in the next 30 to 40 years. We have a huge opportunity. Some of the best food-related organizations, all the way from the farm to the shelf, are located right here, okay? And many of them have extensive experiences outside of the United States, where the major problem, of course, is going to be. So if you haven't already done it, and I suspect you've thought about this already, you have a unique opportunity as a land-grant institution to partner with some of the other organizations that are headquartered in this state to bring about a significant change in the world, to be helpful to them, and they in turn to be helpful to you. So I strongly recommend that you look for those opportunities to partner with people who have got huge experiences on the ground in many of these underdeveloped countries, or similarly underdeveloped countries, where they have been able to make a significant difference and have a deep understanding of what's the root cause of many of these issues, and then figure out ways to interact with the local governments, who oftentimes, partly because of corruption, I understand that, but oftentimes don't understand the importance of the rule of law and the rights of land ownership that impacts this. If you go to parts of Africa, you'll see that parts of those countries that were previously reasonably productive no longer are, because they have lost the right of ownership. And when it was necessary in that hard plain to go down and drill into the land to increase the productivity of the soil so that moisture could seep in instead of just running off, it's dead today, because people have decided they don't dare invest in the necessary equipment because they don't have confidence in the right of ownership. I'm just giving that as an example. So I strongly encourage us to take advantage of the collaborative opportunities that exist because of the agricultural/food expertise and international participation that exists within our state, for what it's worth. Thank you.
Senior Vice President Jones.
Yes. Chair Cohen, Regent Larson, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'll try to be very succinct in responding to your comments and your question. We know that fundamentally that a failure to close this achievement gap is going to have far-reaching implications for not only the seven-county metro, but the entire state of Minnesota. And it's one of the reasons that we have been quietly working behind the scenes in a very collaborative way to build a coalition of all the stakeholders across initially the 7-county metro to think about a different way and how do you build a system. You know, we've got a lot of programs, as I said, but we don't have a system with data where data-driven decisions can be made, where you're holding all of the providers along the K through 12 to career networks, people that are intimately engaged in early childhood education, in classroom and out of classroom activities, engaging the school system, all using a common set of metrics and benchmarks and evaluating their progress and using a continuous improvement process. The problem is that we have pockets of excellence, but no real way of replicating that excellence across the 7-county metro and the state. So it doesn't do much good to close the achievement gap for those students that live, say, in South Minneapolis, between Lake Street and Highway 36, unless you have a way of replicating that to North Minneapolis and East St. Paul and other communities. And that's one of the things that's lacking in our current system. There's no system approach. There's no common set of metrics and benchmarks. And more importantly, the philanthropic community is becoming very clear that there's grown tired of throwing money at this problem and not seeing any significant return on those investments in terms of closing the gap. So we've been working quietly, and President Kaler has really been articulating a very strong sense of urgency about this, which is being heard across this community. And we certainly hope that over the next several months, we'll be able to come back and talk about a strategy that we think has a great potential of reaching this and resolving this very complex issue. And just very briefly on the issue of collaboration to address these global food issues. It's becoming the way of doing business. It has become the way that these complex issues have to be challenged is through collaborations. For example, we are currently in the process of applying for a very, very large USAID grant through a new program. It's a consortium grant. And so what it means is that no longer can a single investigator have the expertise to go after these funds. It has to be a collaboration. Our collaboration, if successful, will involve 13 colleges from this university, all of the multinational corporations you talked about that are involved in food, Cargill, General Mills, the whole 9 yards. Because it takes that kind of transdisciplinary team of folks to be able to come in with a strategy that has any chance of being successful and meeting the demand for food that's being driven by the population growth and other factors around the world. And you'll see this pretty much coming through a lot of the federally funded programs where they're asking for more transdisciplinary approaches that brings in people from a broad array of disciplines rather than just agriculture alone or any single discipline. So it's the way of the future. And it's the only way these opportunities will be addressed. So
good for you. I think that there's already an example of that type of collaboration. I remember the whole food safety issue and some of the large grants that we got. And part of the reason that took place was not just because of the expertise of the university, but a collaboration with many of our businesses in the community. And I probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done that. And that's a great model, I think.
Regent Frobenius.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I want to go back to some comments that Regent Simmons made in her first set of questions on this, which I sort of interpreted as saying, how do we manage the scope of mission of the University of Minnesota in light of the land grant mission or the land grant charge? And who makes that decision and how is it made in this institution? Let me back up a little bit and get at a question that sort of is at the core of this in my mind. And my background is in healthcare, so I have this hang up with what occurred in the last century. Right after World War II, our federal government gave hospitals all sorts of money to go out and build new hospitals across this country. Everybody loved that and thought it was great until 50 years later, the courts interpreted that to say, and by the way, you're obligated to give large amounts of free care to patients using those hospitals. I need to understand something about this whole land grant process. I need to understand whether we are responding to a legal obligation or whether we are responding to a moral obligation, spelled M-O-R-A-L, not M-O-R-R-I-L. And I think it's kind of important to sort out, before we really start to identify the scope of this mission, are we responding to a legal obligation, and are we responding to a moral obligation? I mean, I understand what the PUF fund or Permanent University Fund dollars are. I've seen those numbers come in through the Investment Advisory Committee and the Finance Committee. We weren't quite as fortunate as the state of Texas that we managed to swap our land mid-process for a bunch of oil-rich land and fund the rest of our buildings for eons. So certainly the proceeds from the land grant dollars are certainly not funding anything near the mission and the scope we're talking about. So I think at some point we need to understand what our legal obligations are here and what we're choosing to use as a moral compass for the programming of the University of Minnesota and where that mission takes us.
Provost Hanson.
Chair Cohen and Regent Frobenius, thank you very much for an additional inflection on that question, which I think is very interesting. I think the particular legal perimeters are in some ways a sort of small part of the foundation here. I think it was partly what is said to have justified the original granting of the resources to build these schools that provides a sort of wisdom that guides this. And in part it's a moral compass, but I think it may help to say that it's also a kind of practical impetus that was enough to, in the end, lead to the passage of the Moral Act and the subsequent acts. It was in part to produce a more perfect union, in part to make sure that communities would prosper. And that's in some ways a moral obligation of the state, but in other ways it's a very practical one. It leads to the state sustaining itself, the state moving forward, the state being able to be appropriately competitive with other states around the globe. And so it's not as if it's a moral obligation in the sense that one is trying to do good for others. It's that people are all implicated together in the aims that the Moral Act underlies. I think that the issue of scope of mission is a terrifically interesting issue. We can see some of the things that enlarge the scope of mission if we think about the underlying aim of access and the way in which candidates for higher education were delineated from the mid-19th century until now. Rural folks in the mid-19th century were not getting much higher education, but the federal government in its wisdom decided that was not going to be a good future for the U.S. if they didn't get a higher education and learn about the developments of the Industrial Revolution. And I think that's another reason that the mining aspect was sort of caught in the original Land Grant Act, where it speaks of the mechanical arts, and it's one of the reasons that the University of Minnesota has such a strong school of science and engineering, because it took that mission seriously. The access issue now, it seems to me, is one where we've seen, more and more identified groups of people being understood as important to this commonwealth. And the extension of the land grant mission to historically black colleges, to the tribal colleges, and now in a new and subtler way in the extension of our attention to the achievement gap. I mean, you can see that as really connected with this fundamental issue of access. Some folks in the mid-19th century were not quite ready for the kind of higher education that could have been provided at that point by, say, Harvard or one of the schools that had been long in existence in the East. But that changed as attention was directed toward educating these people. And that's exactly what this university is doing in minding the achievement gap. And it's one of the reasons that a university of this sort does take as part of its land grant mission work in the social sciences and in political sciences and so on. So it knows better how to intervene from the research that's done in those fields in areas where we face a particular kind of practical problem. So I think it is in some ways, as you say, a kind of moral issue, but that also cashes out as a practical issue.
Regent Johnson, I'll put you on the list. We have several others before you, so soon. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the background of the act. It's a reminder of our responsibilities, whether they're legal or moral. It doesn't matter that much to me. They are responsibilities, and they're broad. They're urban, and they're rural, and they're agriculture, and they're mining, and they're everything, and they're worldwide and local. One of the takeaways for me today is this idea of more focus on engagement and matching our capabilities with the most important problem in the state, which is the achievement gap. And the gap is something that every school district is struggling with, the state's struggling with, and it's a problem for which there has been no progress made. And so I'm really drawn to the idea of a systems approach that develops best practices, that measures, and metrics are created. So that really feels like a priority for, I mean, there are unlimited needs, there's unlimited priorities, but that's the one that the state needs most help on. And so I appreciate the whole presentation, but particularly the focus on the achievement gap.
Regent Broad.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like I should get some continuing education credits from this discussion. This has been really, really interesting, and I appreciate the background as well. You know, I think about the intangibles of the outreach mission and the land grant mission in really bridging the gap between rural and metro. And I think that gap and the opportunity that we have as a university to bridge that gap is significant. And it's not just as significant in terms of the mission, but in terms of the outcomes. When you think about the economic rationale for the strong focus on the agriculture economy as well. I'll hit the agriculture piece. I'm a farm kid, so that's kind of where I remember my extension agent by name from when I was a kid. And so that piece to me is extremely important. And I was just pulling up, I was multitasking while you were talking, and I was just pulling up on the Department of, or the Extension's website, some really interesting information. So when I think about this focus on the outreach, the extension, the agriculture mission, the, all of those things, I then think about how do we communicate that value to the state? How do we communicate that value to the public? How do we communicate that value broadly so that people understand why the mission is so important and critical to this state? And there's a chart in there, and I encourage the Regents at some point to look at that website. There's a great chart in there that shows the food and agriculture export numbers blow away any other sector in our economy. So what that means is that not only are all the inputs local, but the amount of money we draw into our state is so significant, and that economic argument to me is almost equal to the social arguments that are often made about outreach. And that economic opportunity that we have as a state, I truly believe that we've got to communicate that stronger, communicate that more directly, and communicate that in a way that shows the true focus on that economy and on that sector.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Regent Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I want to make a comment on the focus here and discussion we've been able to have about the achievement gap, which I think is necessary, and the approach of the university to look at from a systems perspective is helpful. Where I take a systems perspective is on the idea that the achievement gap is not the only one that's out there. That if we can look at our ability to solve that problem as one that will also have an impact on the racial disparities in health, the racial disparities in employment, the racial disparities in incarceration, and on down the line, because we have them in all those other systems in Minnesota, that thinking of it in that kind of framework might help us bring some additional minds to bear on the problem, that we have more than an education community here, that our School of Public Health, our School of Education, any of them can be participating in that, because addressing it at the level of education can help address it in many other arenas as well. So I invite us to think about it in that framework. I also just wondered if you could answer some simple questions for me, like who else is a land-grant institution? Who is a public university that's not a land-grant? And can you do any sort of quick comparison between states that have land-grant institutions and perhaps the nature of their business climate versus states that do not? Just a little geography, just because, only because I don't think only in terms of land grant, I think in terms of names of places like Virginia, Madison, Berkeley, and so if we could compare ourselves, or if it's an easier question, maybe who's doing this well? Who's doing land grant mission really well?
Thank you, Chair Cohen and Regent Ramirez. On the first question of some examples, there are some surprising examples. MIT is a land grant. That's one of the privates, and Cornell is a private, but it has a sort of separate state-supported portion. And as Vice President Jones mentioned, they took some expensive timberland in Wisconsin to help fund the university. In the state I just came from, Purdue was the land-grant institution, but Indiana University, although it understood itself to have an important state mission, was not the land-grant institution. Wisconsin-Madison is, Penn State is, but the University of Pennsylvania isn't. University of California is. It began with a land grant to Berkeley, but it's been extended in other ways. And as you know, the agricultural mission is not primarily at Berkeley anymore. It's at Davis and elsewhere in the state. And there are a number of historically black colleges and universities that are land grant institutions. In Michigan, and the University of Michigan is not. Michigan State is. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. I just was hoping that we get a sense. And do you know one or places where it's happening particularly well, that they're finding the 21st century application of the land grant mission?
Well,
thank
you, Chair. That's
Chair Cohen, Regent Ramirez, Minnesota is one place I think that's doing it extremely well. And there are other places, to our east, University of Wisconsin, I think, has a very comprehensive land grant mission that's executed extremely well. Michigan State is probably the poster child for executing in a very seamless, highly effective way the global part of the land grant mission. I mean, if you ask others, Michigan State always comes to mind in that global context. But and so there, if you look across most of the land grant universities that are similarly situated to Minnesota, most of them do a very fine job in driving the kind of return on the investment and having that both local, statewide, and global impact that most land-grant universities have. One of the things I'd just like to point out is that one of the things that's happening today is because of the effectiveness and the impact of the land-grant model, a lot of urban universities are starting to embrace a core element of the land-grant mission, and that's addressing the public good. When Nancy Cantor comes here to have the conversation with President Kaler, what you'll hear her talk about is how she's positioned that private institution. And she's getting a lot of criticism about this from some sectors over the last several months, if you've been following the Chronicle of Higher Education, for leveraging universities' resources to create these seamless partnerships with the community surrounding the university in Syracuse to drive economic development, to address some of the really fundamental issues that are plaguing that contemporary urban community. And so you'll find more research universities that don't have in statute a land-grant mission, adjusting their mission and being very clear about the need to focus that mission more on the public good by creating seamless partnerships with communities and addressing those issues that the community says is important, rather than the historic way that most big research universities, it's all about, and in the past, it's much too often it's been about people, scholars going to, faculty going to the community to research topics of their interest and using the community as research vessels or tools rather than as seamless partners. And so that's one of the things that you'll see happening is I don't think that the federal government has much land that is going to be given to public research university to give them land grant status. But these public research universities are modifying their mission to address the public good. In fact, I serve on the board of directors. I represent President Kaler on the board of directors of something called the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities. And when I look at who's around that table, the University of Minnesota is one of the few urban universities that by definition is located in a community large enough to be a member of that group. The rest of these universities are more public universities that are located in major cities like the University of Houston, IUPUI in Indianapolis, places like that, that have been for the last 3 or 4 years trying to create an urban land grant focus out of the federal government to support their work in solving complex problems. So the land grant model is something that's unique and it's been so effective that a lot of these urban universities are trying to emulate that model. And I know I didn't get at the latter part of your question, but I apologize.
Provost Hanson.
Thank you, Chair Cohen and Regent Ramirez. I guess the other thing I'd just like to add to that is that it is in taking that the kind of the public good and the development mission so seriously that the United States has created a higher education system that is in many ways the envy of the world, and as developing countries right now think about how to move forward in education, they're struggling with some of these same issues about, educating the elite versus educating the broader mass of population. And there's a way in which again, I think what I think of as the huge underlying wisdom of the Morrill Act and the subsequent legislation produced a network of institutions that's just unparalleled in its strength.
Regent Johnson. I didn't give you a chance before. Now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Dr. Jones, Dr. Hanson, excellent comments, and you have woken my Norwegian Lutheran mind this morning to a new and higher direction. Let me explain. As I look across the room to my Regent colleagues who are involved in various organizations and activities, and I'll just look at Regent Simmons in relationship to the Mayo Clinic, it's what I call self-determination. Organizations, governments, movements have self-determination, and when those are clear and concise, precise goals, they move toward those self-determination. In your case, to provide health care to the peoples of the world. So what I'm thinking about under the banner of the Morrill Act, and President Kaler, get ready, if you were to write the Morrill Act today going forward, how would you write that for our self-determination of this university as it fits into the problems that have been cited this morning, world population, world hunger, the governments, institutions, and the question is, where does this university find itself as the linchpin for all of these things that we have talked about this morning? Because I do believe it is the linchpin. of governments and business and agriculture. It's sitting right here. And so under the Moral Act going forward, how would you reinstate it, or wouldn't you reinstate it, restate it?
President Kaler, certainly there have been no easy questions, and I was thinking that both Provost Hanson and Senior Vice President Jones had fielded some very difficult questions, but you may have the toughest.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, Regent Johnson. Several things. I did indicate to the chair that I wanted to close with some comments, and I'm not sure there are other questions left, but I will do that and respond to you, and thank my colleagues for, I think, a remarkable presentation and the board for a robust discussion of a very important element. Very directly, Regent Johnson, if I had to write the Moral Act today, I think I would not change a single word. I think it describes very well our public engagement mission and our commitment and primary focus on serving the people of the state of Minnesota. I do think that we expand beyond that moral with an I to the moral with an A mission very naturally. We are blessed to be at an institution that is, while not unique, among a handful, perhaps a small handful of institutions in the United States that have the scope and span to tackle the pressing problems of the world. And we have a moral obligation to do that. So I believe the centrality of our mission in the state of Minnesota, our duty to serve the people of the state of Minnesota, can be met in full, and we have capacity beyond that to address these pressing issues of the world, and we simply should do that.
Regent Hung.
Cohen, thank you for this interesting discussion and speaking about the land grant mission in the 21st century. I just wanted to go back to a topic that Regent Simmons and Regent Frobenius brought up, which is about the scope of this land grant mission. And I think the reason why we bring up scope is at the end we always think about, well, how big is the scope, because how many resources do we have to meet all of those obligations that we might have. And I'd like to suggest and maybe want in the future some type of discussion about our strategy in this, because I think at the end, with the limited resources and time that we have, strategy is about making choices and saying no to certain things, and then being able to focus on the things that we're uniquely positioned to do, and perhaps that is something like the achievement gap or something that's more native to Minnesota, and depending on how we think. But I also caution that a lot of times many of the things we've listed out, they're very glamorous, and we all want to be part of solving some of these big world problems, but we have to focus on the limited resources that we do have and do what we can best with those. Thanks.
Regent Allen.
I was thinking I might be the only one not to say anything, and I didn't want to be in that position, so thank you. I simply want to say thank you for a great presentation and for the commitment to the subject that you both exhibited.
Right, and on that note, I think I will let President Kaler have one more comment, and then I will add my thanks, and we'll close the discussion.
Great.
President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I will be brief. Many of you have touched on the elements of resources. I am not talking about using the resources of the state of Minnesota or our students' tuition. I'm talking about our ability to compete on the national and international stage for very significant externally funded elements of support. We have a program in the Academic Health Center in Africa, in Uganda, centrally, that is funded by the NIH that is remarkable and impactful. We have a Center for Food Safety that's funded by the National Homeland Security, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really an element of using our research capacity. And to that, and my final point would be to Regent Larson, you talked about the centrality of the food resources in this area. The analogy is simple. We are the Silicon Valley of the food industry in the world, and we have not yet taken full advantage of that, and we will.
Thank you, President Kaler. Clearly, this is a subject that with which the board has resonated a great deal. Everybody, it has been both philosophical and practical, I believe, and certainly speaks to the foundations of the university and to what the job that this board is addressing. So Provost Hanson and Senior Vice President Jones, thank you enormously for a very, very interesting presentation, and board members for a very vigorous discussion. Thank you. Is there any old business? Any new business? At this board meeting and yesterday, the committees did not meet, and so we will not have reports from the committees. If there is no other business, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? If not, the meeting is adjourned.